Hi, this is Simon from Tokyo Productions and welcome to another tutorial for Motion 5. And today we're going to be taking a look at building this. So it's a transparent 3D cube with a glowing pulsating core, and then we've also got these nice refractions. And I guess if you wanted to get fancy, you could call it a Tesseract. So let's get started on this. So here we are, a new project. Let's come over to the project properties. I want to set the width and the height to 800. So there we go, we've got a square project to start with. So I'm going to come over to the library and I'm going to look for generators and I'm going to look for clouds and I'm going to bring that into the project. So then let's click on the Inspector tab and let's adjust these clouds. First of all, I want to come down here and set the method to turbulent. Then what I want to do is I want to remove this black color tab from here by pulling it away from the bar. And I'm going to click on the top here to set a new opacity tab. And I'm going to set its location to 40%. Then I'm going to click on the left-hand opacity tab over here, set its opacity down to 0, and set its location to 10. Then I just need to come down and adjust these layer strengths. So we'll have 0.25 for layer 1, 0.25 for 2, 0 for 3 and 0 for 4. So we end up with something that looks like that. So then I'm going to come down here, I'm going to select the circle mask tool, I'm going to hold down the Shift key and the Alt or Option key, and from roughly the center of the screen I'm going to drag out a mask like that. Come over to its properties here, we're going to set the radius to 300 and we'll set the feather to -25. So my next step is to select the clouds, come to Object, come down to Replicate. So let's come over to the replicator controls here, let's set it to 3D. And let's select Box from the Shape menu. And I want to set the arrangement to Outline. I'm going to set the size down to 200 and then I want for each of these ranks, columns and rows. So 4 columns, 4 rows, 4 ranks. Come down here, set the scale end to 75 and the scale randomness to 10. Then I want to come and enable the Align Angle checkbox. So then I'm going to come over to the library and I'm going to look for filters, come down to Sharpen, and I'm going to grab the Unsharp mask and I'm going to add it to my original clouds layer there. Let's come over to the inspector and I'm going to set the radius to 32 and the amount to 2. And you can see what that's done, that's really made that much more punchy. So I'm going to select that filter, hold down the Alt or Option key, and I'm going to drag it onto the replicator to make a copy. And you'll see that that's added even more punch to this effect. I want to come back to the library. I want to come to Stylize, and I want to grab the Crystallize filter, and I want to add it to the replicator like so, but I just want to move it down behind the unsharp mask. So I'm going to come to Object, Center Back. Come over to the inspector. I'm going to set the size down to 5. Next I'm going to come back over to the library, filters, and I'm going to look for glow, and I'm going to add a glow above the unsharp mask like that. Come over to the inspector, set the glow radius to 100. Let's set the opacity down to 0.5 and the threshold also down to 0.5. And I want to do one other thing I forgot to do, which is come back to the circle mask and let's reset its position so it's nicely in the center. Okay, at this point you'll probably find that performance is quite sluggish because we've set up this complex replicator and added these filters to it. So what we're going to do is we're going to export it. So we'll come to the Share menu, Export Movie. Let's select ProRes 444. Next, make yourself a nice folder for this project, and I'm going to call this Core base. And let's save that out. So then I want you to come over to the file browser, navigate to wherever you saved that, and bring it into the project. So drag it right up to the top there, and let's turn off the original group. And I always recommend this process of rendering out elements whenever you can, because it makes layering them up much easier than if you're trying to layer up these complex processes. So there we go, there's our core base, and let's start making some layers out of this. Let's right click, duplicate, come over to the inspector, properties. I want to set the blend mode to screen, and I want to reduce the scale down to 75%. And let's just add a bit of rotation, 15 degrees. So let's move it over 10 pixels on X and minus 10 pixels on Y, just so we've offset it. Now let's have a look how that plays. Let's select this copy layer, right click, duplicate, come over to the properties again. Let's move it over to minus 30 on X, just so we've got a bit of variation there, and let's have just a different sort of rotation, anything will do, just so it's not the same. And there you go, we've got the beginnings of a core. So I'm going to come to the first layer here, and I want to come down to the timing, open that up, and I'm going to set the speed to 60%, come to the frame blending and set that to blending, and that'll just look a little bit calmer. We've still got a bit more activity in the center. Okay, so then what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this base layer, so right click, duplicate, and let's just turn it off for the time being. And let's select our first layer here, come over to the library, filters, and then let's look for distortion, and let's grab bump map and let's apply it to that first layer. Come over to the inspector, and then I'm just going to grab this layer that I've turned off, and I'm going to add it to the bump map image source well, like that. And you can see this has created this really rather interesting effect on the edges. So then I'm going to duplicate this layer here, the one that I've just applied the bump map to, right click, duplicate, come into its properties, and let's rotate it. Let's just go for something that we think looks good, maybe something like that. I want to take this first layer here, and I just want to increase the scale of it, so 105, like that, just so it's a little bit larger than the other one. And maybe we can just reduce its opacity a little bit, maybe reduce the opacity of this next one as well. Just don't want everything going too crazy. Let's just come to these ones here, and again just reduce the opacity so we don't have complete burnout in the center. Just do it by eye, really. I'm not going to give you precise numbers, something like that. So that's now our core, and it's not looking too bad, and what we're going to do now is we're going to render it out again. So come to the share menu, export movie, again let's go for 444, and let's call this one core comp and save that out. So I'd now like you to save this project file, save as in this case because I've already saved it, and I want you to call it core build, just in case we want to come back to this and adjust it. Okay, so now what we want to do is we want to make a new project, so file, new. So let's come over to the project properties, and this time we want to make it 1920 1080 and 24 frames a second, 10 seconds long. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is come to the library, generators, bring in a color solid, come over to the inspector, make it black, and we'll call this black, and we'll lock it. It's very important when you're compositing to be compositing against black, otherwise you're compositing against transparency and you'll get some unexpected results. So let's close that on down. Next thing we want to do is to make a floor, so let's come over to the library, again let's come to the generators and bring in a color solid, come to the inspector, Let's make the width 5000 and the height 5000. Let's come over to the properties here. Let's try to open the rotation, set the X rotation to 90 degrees. Let's set the Y position to -302. And let's come back to the generator. Let's click on that color and let's make it extremely dark blue, somewhere down there. And let's call this group floor. Okay, so next I'd like to start building the sides of our box. So I'm going to come over to the file browser. So in the comments I'm going to put a link to this texture that I am calling glass. So let's just bring that in to a new group by dragging it up to the top there. Now this is 600 pixels by 600 pixels, which is conveniently the size that I want to make my box. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come down here to the rectangle tool, and from the top here I'm going to drag out a rectangle roughly like that, and let's come over to the geometry. Let's just set the size here to exactly 600 pixels. So let's come over to the style. Let's set the fill to gradient. Let's open up the gradient editor here and set the type to a radial. So I want to set the Y start to 0 and the Y end to -600. So let's come over to the properties and hit the arrow button there just to make sure everything is centered up. Come back to my shape here. Let's do a bit more work on the gradient. So let's remove that left-hand color tab. Let's select this one, click on the color here, and we want to make this pretty dark blue, down somewhere around there I would say, maybe a little bit more saturated, something like that. Okay, so let's click on the top here and set an opacity tab. Let's just close down that color pane there. I'm going to set this to around 60% on its location. Click on the left-hand color tab and let's set the opacity down to 10. And then I just want to come to the properties here and let's just reduce the overall opacity down to about 90%. So what this is doing is giving this blue wash in the corners like that. So let's just duplicate this rectangle. So right click, duplicate. In this case, let's turn off the fill and let's turn on the outline. Let's set the opacity down to about 15%, like that. Let me just turn off the overlays so we can see a bit better what's happening. Show overlays, let's turn that off, and I'll zoom in a little bit on that box just so we can see. So this is now our outline around the outside. Let's just click on the brush color and let's just make that blue, something like that. So this is just giving us a little bit of definition to the edges. Then I'm going to duplicate this one more time, so right click, duplicate. This time I want to set the brush opacity all the way back up to 100, and let's set the width to 5. Then I'm going to come down and I'm going to select the rectangle mask tool, and I'm going to draw a rectangle mask, something like that, holding down the shift key to make sure it's square. Come over to the properties, transform and reset it, and let's rotate it through 45 degrees on Z. Come over to the mask properties, invert the mask. Now we've got this just on the corners, and let's set the feather to 100 just to soften it off. So then I'd like to come back over to the library, come to generators, bring in a color solid. Let's stick it there at the top for the time being. Inspector, let's set the width and height to 600. Let's come to object, center back, put it at the back of the group. Click on the color, make that black. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the glass, come over to the properties and set its opacity down to 50%. And then I'm going to select that black and I'm going to set its opacity to 75%. And now let's call this group box sides. Okay, so the next step is to build the box itself. So we're going to take this box sides and we're going to come to object and we'll select replicate. This makes us a new group, and let's call this new group box. and it's turned off the original group, you'll notice. So let's close that box sides group down. So let's select the replicator, and what we want to do is we want to turn on the 3D checkbox again, like that, which enables us to select box from the shape menu. And then we want to set the size to 600, and we want to set the columns to 1, the rows to 1, and the ranks we want to set to 2. And I just want to come down here to the scale, and I want to set that to 99.5. And this is because of certain anomalies in the way that motion handles edge pixels, and that'll just save you any problems there. So let's just zoom out a bit. So let's just quickly add a camera so we can see what's happening, and let's switch to 3D like that. Come to the camera properties, and let's just rotate a little bit on Y so we can see our box under construction. So I'm going to call this first replicator front, and then I'm going to duplicate it. So right click, duplicate, and I'm going to call this sides, this duplicate. Come to properties, and then I'm going to rotate it through 90 degrees on Y, and you can see we've now got the sides. Then I'm going to select the front again, right click, duplicate. I'm going to call this top, come over to properties, and I'm going to rotate it through 90 degrees on X. And now if I come back to my camera and rotate on X, you can see we've got a fully formed box. So I'm just going to zero out that X rotation, and I want to bring in my core just so we can see how that looks all together. So I'm going to turn off the camera, come over to the file browser, let's look for our core comp, and let's bring it in at the top of the project. And what I want to do is I want to make that not 3D, so turn that off. Come over to the inspector, properties, let's just set the blend mode of this to screen, this group. And now if I turn my camera back on again, you can see I've got my core in the middle of my box. I'm just going to take my core group, come to the library, filters, color correction, and use color balance, add that to that group, come to the inspector, I'm going to click on the mid-tones, and let's just push those towards blue like that, just so it sits in a little bit better. And let's call this group core. Okay, so this isn't really looking very plausible just yet, but it's going to start looking a whole lot better when we start to add in some lights. So let's do that now. So let's come to Object, New Light. So first of all, I want to set the intensity to 1000, and I'll come down and set the fall off to 10. Then let's come over to the properties, and what I want to do is I want to put a light on each corner of the box. So that'll be 8 lights in all. So let's open up this position here. So what we're going to do is set the X position to 310, the Y position to 310, and the Z position to 310 as well. So that light is over there on that corner there. So we need to duplicate it, right click, duplicate. Let's move this one across to positive 310 on Z, so it goes over to there. Right click, duplicate, and let's come across here to the properties. Let's set this to negative 310 on X, so that goes over there. Right click, duplicate, properties. We need to move this back on Z to fill that back corner, so minus 310. That one's over there at the back. What we can now do is select all 4 of those lights, right click, duplicate, and then if we come to Object, Bring to Front, that'll move those to the top so we can identify those a bit better. So then with all 4 of them selected, let's just move them down on Y. Let's go for minus 290. And they're now sitting on those bottom corners. So let's just turn off these 3D overlays so we can see that a little bit better. Let's also turn off the overlays themselves, just so we get a clean picture of what it's looking like. And that's really not looking too bad already. So let's just add a couple more lights. Let's select this last one here. Let's duplicate that. Let's come over to the properties here. Let's hit the reset button just to reset the position. I want this to be 0 on all axes. Let's come back over to its properties and let's set the fall off to 5%. And then let's duplicate that one more time. Right click, duplicate. Let's set the intensity of this one down to 750. Let's come over to properties. Let's set the position to 480. And what I like to do with this one is to add an oscillate behavior to its intensity. So let's select the intensity, right click, add parameter behavior, oscillate, and let's set the amplitude to 500 and the speed let's set to 20. And that's just going to give us a pulsing effect on that light. So if you haven't saved your project, now is probably quite a good time to do that. Let's just make a new group, object new group, just to tidy away these lights. So select all those lights, put them in that new group, call that lights, and then we can close up that group, give ourselves a bit more space. Let's also close up that box group. What I'd like to do is to increase the sense that this core is illuminating the floor. So what I'm going to do is open up my box sides, and I'm going to grab this rectangle here that I made, that first rectangle, that blue one, and I'm going to hold down the Alt or Option key and drag that into the floor group to make a copy. Come over to properties here, let's just reset the transform and let's rotate it on 90 degrees on X. Let's set the Y position to -299. Let's set the blend mode to screen, and then let's increase the scale to 115. And you can see that pokes out under the edge of the box there. Let's come over to the library, filters, blur. Let's grab a Gaussian blur, add that to that rectangle there. Come over to the inspector. Let's set the Gaussian blur value up to 200. And that just softens off the edges. Now let's duplicate this. So right click, duplicate. And come over to the properties here. Let's increase the scale of this to about 130. Just so it spreads out a bit more, something like that. Let's come over to the shape, maybe just adjust this color a little bit. Let's see what happens if we make that a little bit brighter. I think that's quite nice. We're getting a little bit of a blue glow there. But I still don't feel that the bottom of the box and the floor are really being lit by the glowing core. So let's do something about that. Let's come to the top here. Let's come to Object New Group, and I'm going to call this Floor Glints. Then I'm going to take my core comp there, that's in that core group. I'm going to hold down the Alt or Option key and drag that into the Floor Glints group, so that makes a copy of it. And let's come over to properties. Let's reset that so we can remove that Y rotation that's been generated by the camera. Let's rotate it through 90 degrees on X and move it down -299 on Y. So then it's sitting there on the floor. Just want to increase the scale to 110. Let's set the blend mode to screen. Let's right click, duplicate, properties. Let's set the scale of this one to 200. So it's going all the way out there. And let's reduce this opacity. Let's try 10%. And I think that's quite good. We've got just those little suggestions of those lights hitting the floor like that. That's pretty good. I think we can also reduce the opacity of this one. Let's just scroll down until we get something we like. I think I quite like that. That's around 75%. But we'd obviously just need to push a little bit of blue into this. So I'm going to come over to the library, filters, color correction. I'm going to grab Colorize, add that to that Floor Glints group. Come to the inspector, remap black, make sure that's set to black. Remap white. Let's come over here, make that blue. Let's just bring that down round about there. And that just helps to sit it in a bit better. Just want to very quickly come back to my lights here. And you remember we had this main oscillating light. Just want to adjust that color. So if we come in here to its color, just push a little bit of blue into that. I think that's going to help matters quite a lot. Okay, so I think that's probably about it for part 1. I hope you can join me again for part 2 when there's a whole load of interesting stuff that we'll be adding to finish off the project. So I hope to see you again shortly.